Hi everybody, you're very welcome to our Evolve UK webinar, all about establishing a UK presence. We have a lot of interest in this webinar, so we have decided not to activate the chat function. At the very end of the webinar, I'll give you my email address and you can email your questions to me and we'll find the best way to communicate the answers back to you. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Deirdre McPartlin and I am the Enterprise Ireland Manager in the UK. And I'm sitting beside me is Jerry from Ecovis, and I'll just let him introduce himself as I play with the technology to find out how to get to the next slide. Jerry.
Thanks, Deirdre, and I'm really pleased to be here today. As background, I've spent about 20 years plus as a partner in Ecovis. We're a general accounting practice here in Soho, helping overseas businesses set up in the UK. And over that time, I've seen successes and failures of all sorts of businesses from all sorts of sectors. In terms of the practice, probably half of our clients are internationally owned. They span from US, Ireland and mainland Europe. And we have sister offices in probably about 75 countries now across the world through the Ecovis network. So for some of you that have plans to expand further from the UK, you know, we can help in other jurisdictions as well.
Fantastic. So Jerry, just before we get into the meat of the presentation, I just want to set the scene. So this is one of our Evolve UK webinar series, and essentially as an organisation, we've been very active talking to our clients about the importance about preparing for Brexit, but that is in the context that we know our clients see the UK as their most strategic market. It's the market that most of our companies start in and they go on to scale in. So as the UK evolves, and it will evolve as a result of Brexit, it will evolve as a result of technology drivers, it will evolve from demographics. What we want to do is bring insights to our clients in a very timely way. This webinar is of particular interest at all times to our clients, and you know that, Jerry, from your vast experience of working with clients and Irish companies. So really today is about capturing those insights. We will record this and deliver it on the globalambition.ie/Evolve UK website. That could be fully up and running in 2 weeks. So that's the context for this particular webinar. And then just to give a little bit more context, Irish companies at some stage come to realise that they need a presence in the UK. And often they are driven by the need to have a salesperson on the ground, and that tends to be the first footprint that they have in the marketplace. And they grow from there, or they win a contract and they're delivering a service. But I think Brexit has sharpened people's focus. You and I have often chatted, and others have chatted about the impression that it gives to your customer base if you have an existing presence on the ground, if you have a permanent or legal entity presence on the ground. And I think a lot of Irish companies are seeing that, particularly post-Brexit, they need to show their UK customers that they're committed to the market. So at the moment, over 102 people are employed by Irish companies in the UK. And just so that we realise how much we punch above our weight, that's equivalent to Japan, and it's equivalent to Sweden, economies that are much bigger than our own. So Jerry, I'm just going to let you discuss a little bit further, if you want to introduce Ecovis any further, or if you just want to launch into the agenda.
So I think, you know, I've given a background on myself and the firm. The broad areas we'll cover today are looking at, as Deirdre said, the legal status and what that might look like if you want a presence here. We'll also look at some funding options. Taxation always is a favorite topic. And I suppose at the end, as I said, I've 20 years plus experience of helping businesses set up in the UK. Some some key issues in terms of what success may look like and things to focus on. Simple things, but without them, your chances of success here are diminished. So that's kind of the agenda. It's going to be interactive. We may not cover all the slides today, and as Deirdre said, there's an opportunity to ask questions by email at the end, and please use that to both of us. You know, I view it as an exciting time. Brexit has got a lot of negativity, but it also is an exciting time for business change, and you know, successful businesses are very good at spotting opportunities in a changing environment.
Okay. So I think the fundamental, if we start with the very basics, there's various different legal entities that you can set up. Can you talk us through what those entities are and maybe some of the pros and cons?
Yeah. So there's 3 on the screen there, and the 4th one is a PLC structure. I never advocate anyone setting up a PLC. It's too bureaucratic for the needs of 99.9% of Irish companies. So you're left with 3 options: a branch, which in the UK under company law is now called a UK establishment, a limited company, very similar to what you'd be used to in Ireland, and a partnership, quite similar as well to partnership structures in Ireland. In general, I suppose going back over 20 years, I've set up 1 branch. Probably 90% plus of the entities I've set up in that time have been limited companies, and that leaves what, 10% odd as partnerships. And if we deal with partnerships first, and when are they most useful? Generally, they're used by financial services sector because they want to attract big hitting senior executives, and the way partnerships are structured, they're easier to bring in and inject capital, and the tax rules are a bit more favorable for partners coming and going than in a limited company. Both of them can be set up in 3 to 5 working days in the UK. If you're very keen, you can have each of them set up on the same business day, if it's necessary. The filing details for both of them are pretty similar than you'd have at home. So the formal accounts need to be filed at Companies House within 9 months of the year end in both cases. And in a limited company, and I'll touch on this, the level of share capital for a new startup business is important because it sends a strong commercial message of commitment to new market. If you put in, you can start a limited company with £2 of share capital, but that doesn't say a great message of market intent to your customer base here. So I'd always advocate, as part of the funding, and we'll come to that later on, that you need to have a reasonable amount of share capital as part of the funding of the setup of the new entity. We'll touch on branch for a minute, and I suppose historically some Irish companies and overseas companies have seen it as the entry point and the easiest point of setting up a business in the UK, because it's an evolution of the Irish business just setting up in the UK. The reason I've only set up 1 in 20 years is, I suppose there's a number of factors really. The time it takes, probably takes, I've said there 4 to 6 weeks, but in reality it probably takes up to 2 months to set up a branch at Companies House here in the UK, because of the amount of information Companies House want and the Q&A back and forth to do so. And also, you know, setting up a branch doesn't make a great statement of commercial intent to a key market, because your customers will say, well, are you here or not? You know, because a branch sends a kind of we're sitting on the fence type message in terms of market commitment. And that's, I suppose, a key theme I will suggest today, that this is a key market for a lot of Irish businesses. You need to demonstrate key commitment to your customer base, because now your UK competitors supplying your customers will try and take advantage of the fact that there's an Irish company that's not really here, competing against them, yet we're here, we're fully established, etc. So you need to square the playing field in a way, and I'm just not keen on branches sending the right commercial message.
Okay, and you mentioned, and you can tell me, are you going to come to it later under the funding piece? The amount, you mentioned you have to put a significant amount share.
I'll talk about that on the funding piece.
So one of the things that I would just like to ask you is, I was chatting to a client recently who had set themselves up as a branch. When Brexit was voted through, they decided that they needed to show that more committed, let's say, intent to the marketplace. So they switched from being a branch to a limited company, and they came across some issues along the way. What, in your view, would be the pitfalls of starting with a branch and then moving to a limited
company? I suppose the positives for a start will cover all the issues. From a tax point of view, moving from a branch to a company from a corporate tax perspective is relatively straightforward, provided that the subsidiary you set up is linked to the entity that the branch was set up under in the first place. So that they need connectivity between them. And then once that's established from a corporate tax perspective, there should be no issue. From a VAT perspective, you can migrate the VAT number from the branch to the limited company, provided the branch was a going concern at the point in time that you want to migrate it across. Then it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of issues that Deirdre mentioned there. In terms of staff, the PAY registration should be straightforward to migrate across. However, if the branch employed staff in the UK, they have to be what's called TUPE'd across to protect their employment rights, longevity, terms of service, etc. And that is a process in itself. So that will take a bit of time and a bit of cost. And I suppose the last area, and probably the most problematic and cumbersome, is dealing with contracts. And this would be the contracts that the branch would have written in its own name here in the UK. And there'll be contracts with clients where they'll now need to be changed. So engagement contracts, whatever, will now need to be written in the name of the limited company. And whilst that might seem simple in nature, the minute you put a new contract in front of a customer, it's always a trigger point for them thinking, oh, should we get this retendered for, etc. It just gives them an unnecessary opportunity to think about the nature of the service you're providing. And also, and it's, I suppose, administratively burdensome, you'll have to change all the supplier contracts that the branch has written in its own name over to the limited company. And I suppose, you know, you may be getting a trend that I'm anti a branch, but a limited company is very simple to set up. And if, heaven forbid, anything goes wrong, they're very simple to wind down. It takes 3 months and there's a set process, and sadly, I suppose in a way, we're quite used to doing them in the office. And also I suppose the concern about the cost of running a limited company from a compliance perspective against a branch, there's not that much difference. But the marketing benefit of having a company and the statement of market intent, to me, significantly outweighs the issue of having a branch and trying to keep your costs a little lower, and it's only a little lower.
Okay. So I think you are now going to talk us through some of the timeline actually involved in setting up a presence in the UK.
You know, I touched on it. It takes 3 to 5 working days to set a company up. And that's probably the first thing in the critical path of establishing more formal presence here in the UK. Normally, these entities are 100% subsidiaries of the Irish parent company, because then the shareholding structure is mirrored and it's part of a group, and things work better within the same group. I would caution to limit the number of legal directors appointed, just from a pure administrative point of view. But I would stress that at least one of the directors should be UK resident for administration and signing documents purposes. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit cumbersome to either send people over and back or to email things over and back all the time. So that's something you need to consider. But setting a limited company up is the first point before you look at a bank account or indeed anything else in terms of getting a more formal presence here.
Okay. Again, that same company that I was talking to, who switched from branch to limited company, they at that time were looking for a bank account, and they said they completely underestimated how long that would take. Yeah. That there's more know your customer due diligence than they had expected.
You know, sadly in a way, and it's probably the good news about setting a business up in the UK is 95% of what you need to do can be done quite quickly and quite efficiently. The 5% is setting up the bank account. And because of fraud and money laundering issues in the UK over the last 5 to 10 years, on average, it will take probably 2 to 3 months to set up a bank account here in the UK. And that needs to be factored in when you're looking at the timeline to launching your business in the UK, because you can't start that process late on in the day and expect the bank account to be there on the 1st of June. If you started the process too late. It is bureaucratic. We help clients set bank accounts up. We haven't found a quicker, easier solution with any bank. And I've been looking at this for 20 years.
Okay. So then we had touched on it earlier, the funding of the setup, if you can talk us through that.
I think, you know, one of the key things is you have to have a realistic view as to what it's going to cost to set up a successful UK business. And what I'm looking at on this slide is the options that the Irish parent company have in terms of the different ways they can inject money into the UK business. So you're going to have to put a financial budget together as to what the first year cost will look like, and then look at how do I divide that between permanent investment, share capital. I've always had a view that something like £25,000 of share capital is a good statement of market intent. That money will be needed in the UK business anyway, so it's not as if it's lost to the business. It can be used, but it makes a statement of intent. So when one of your customers or potential customers goes on Companies House and looks up the new entity and sees that it doesn't have £2 of share capital, it has £25,000 of share capital. When your business development director goes for the first potential meeting with a new client or a potential client, there's a better message before he or she even goes in the door. The other two aspects of funding are more flexible in terms of additional funding may be needed in the first year, and that can be done by either loan capital between the parent and the subsidiary company over 3 to 4 years. You need to ensure commercial interest rates apply for transfer pricing tax rules, and also intercompany floating balance that ebbs and flows depending on the profitability and needs of the UK subsidiary. It's probably more short term, it's more flexible, but it should be there. And I think a combination of all three need to be considered when you're looking at the funding options for any UK entity.
Okay. I think we're going to move into tax implications. So well, let me put it another way. You're an Irish company, you have a team that you have to hire and put on the ground. Talk us through what the tax implications are. Okay. And is it different for a team than for, you know, your first sales hire, for example?
Okay. I think the first thing is, no matter who you have on the ground here, if they're a UK resident person, you have to have a UK payroll registration scheme in place. Yeah. So even if the Irish company doesn't have an entity here, but you have somebody on the ground doing something in terms of marketing, you have to have a UK payroll registration scheme in place. And And I suppose a word of caution as you move to hiring more and more people, and the word, I suppose, contractor comes to mind. HMRC are very, very hard these days on this whole issue of self-employed stroke contractor stroke employee. And there's a huge drive to convert self-employed to employees across the board, across all sectors. And there has been a lot of abuse in this area. There's been a lot of companies set up for employees to work, well, for people to work solely for one entity just through a conduit that's called a limited company. So there's been a lot of abuse. I suppose the next issue, and I refer to it on the slide as permanent establishment. So this would be the status of the UK company here for corporate tax purposes. And, you know, I talk about it having a stable and ongoing presence in a foreign country. So you can have different types of tax status here. If you look on the right-hand side, you could have a cost plus entity, which is purely a marketing entity. And for a lot of startup businesses, both US and Irish, you know, the first foot soldiers here in the UK are business development stroke marketing people. And you can have an arrangement with HMRC where they accept that the risks and rewards of doing business still sit in Ireland, and you've got a couple of people beating the streets here, but not taking any managerial risk. And lack of managerial risk, HMRC accept lower profit return. I've looked at a figure of 5 to 7%, and we use those figures for our own cost plus entities that we run through the practice. So that is an accepted margin. Once you start employing operational or trading people that are actually doing the doing that results in income being generated, you move to full trading status here in the UK, and the profit and loss account has to reflect all of the trading involved here in the UK. So it's always an evolution as to what your tax status is here. And you have to be careful because employing the first operational person may seem quite natural to you, but it may change your corporate tax status here. VAT, and I suppose to demystify, there is the option, and on one of the slides we talk about NETP, non-established taxable person status. So you can have a VAT number here without having any presence here in the UK. And for a lot of Irish businesses, that may be a very attractive way of starting business here. But I go back to, I suppose, my statement about if you're serious about your commercial intent towards the UK market, just having an NETP presence doesn't send a great message to your customers. And I suppose post-Brexit, your competitors here will be looking at how they can take advantage of foreign suppliers in the UK market. So, you know, I'm not a huge fan of NETP status. If the UK is a significant market for any Irish company, I think they need a formal presence here.
So where NETP has come up with our clients has been particularly when they're looking at customs. So a number of our clients have been looking at if they're a product company that they export to the UK, they've been looking at the export side, but realize then that maybe on the import side, their customer is expecting that they will take over imports. So they've been looking at NETP, is that correct?
Yeah.
As a first way of actually getting their VAT number and EORI number and so on. But you're not a fan, Jim.
No, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan because I think customers will be looking more intently about the commitment of foreign suppliers now that we've come out of the UK, out of the EU here post-Brexit.
Is there anything more that you're covering on this?
No, I think okay. We're good.
So then we said we'd keep this first session short to in and around half an hour or so. So I think what we'll do is talk through some of the, I suppose, the pitfalls that you see. But you know, you've seen a lot of companies establish a presence. what has been successful in that and what has been less successful? What do you think people should avoid?
I think the first thing is commercial viability. There's an assumption at times that what works in Ireland will definitely work in the UK in terms of product or service sales. I think you need to demystify that and have a very robust marketing plan with the help of Enterprise Ireland to look at the UK market, look at the competition, and have a very detailed view as to what success will look like. I touched on funding and budgets and that, the boring stuff, but I think you must have a realistic view of what year one success looks like, because otherwise, how do you measure what progress you're making? And the danger is you actually don't know whether you're making real progress or not, and you're continuing to fund something that may not be getting traction. I talk about knowledge, and I suppose the thing that I see in businesses that fail is the lack of proper planning across the board in terms of all areas. But I suppose the most important factor that I've seen over 20 years is strong local management moving to the UK to run the UK operation. And this may be a cost to the Irish business, but there is an inherent risk if you recruit 2 or 3 salespeople.
Jerry has a cold. He's very good to come into us, and you're doing really well. No frog in the throat yet.
Apart from that one. So I think there's an inherent higher risk if you recruit 2 or 3 people off the bat to be your team in the UK without having any of your management in Ireland that are not conflicted in a way in terms of telling you really how it is. Because if you have a UK recruited sales and business director, their job is on the line if they tell you, you know what, we haven't really got traction. So they're always going to tell you, yeah, the sales funnel is improving, things are just about to tip off. You need your own local people here to tell you how it is, how the market is, to impact the culture and customs of your business to the customer base, etc. And I couldn't stress that more strongly. Now, that will be a cost to the Irish business in terms of relocating somebody here for a short or medium term, but the chances of success are significantly greater if you do that.
I think just to reinforce that, we've been talking recently to our clients about their recruitment experience in the market, and we'd hope later in the year to do a webinar maybe around that, certainly a guide. And they do say that. I think they say the UK is a strategic market, and for us to be really successful here, we need to understand and get a feel for the market. And by doing that, the closer we get at a senior level to the market, the more we actually understand the type of person that we need to hire to actually take the market forward.
And I've seen a number of my clients and our clients hire interim management that are specialists. These are project managers that are specialists in business development, finance, operations, etc., for a crucial maybe 6 to 9 months first phase. And these are very specialist project managers that come in and do a very specialist market open entry type assignment. And then once they fulfill their brief, it may be then that you recruit local UK business development director. But I think it's riskier if you recruit 2 or 3 people from the off and hope, as you remotely manage them from Dublin, that it's all going to work swimmingly.
So two other issues that I've heard recently from clients, one, and it refers back to something that you had said earlier, was that informal starting off and then rolling on, and then realise, not so much getting into trouble with HMRC, but actually having issues then with HMRC that need to be unravelled. So one company told us about employing a UK person on an Irish contract. The person moved over here. Then they continued to hire people in the UK on Irish contracts. And I think you referred to it earlier. You know, the hiring operational people on the ground is perceived completely differently from HMRC, and they had to then go right the way back and
unscramble it. And
absolutely.
And I think, you know, the message is, it may seem logical to do that sort of in terms of that order, but you do need to talk to people, ourselves or somebody else, and say, look, these are our plans for the UK. These are the types of people we want to put on the ground. What does that mean? And the planning bit that I stressed needs to be done before the event rather than unscramble it after the event.
Okay. One other question, I'm not sure whether you can answer it on the hop or not, but it's a live question that came to me. I said I'd put it to you today. A company who has a presence in Ireland, a presence in London, they built their team in London. The nature of the world means that projects, sometimes there are more projects in Ireland than projects in the UK, and moving that team between both markets, they're finding that complicated. Is it simply complicated, or what you need to?
I think this is an issue about the longevity of the team staying in the UK and whether they have an income tax presence here or not. There are specific rules around length of stay here. And it's the same as anything. Find out what you can and can't do. It is possible to move the teams around short term.
Okay.
Short term, but only short term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once you start to have the teams staying here and renting somewhere and having more of a tangible presence here, there's a concern that some of those team may have a UK tax presence.
Okay. So these are some other slides that we said we're not going to talk in detail, but you want to quickly refer to them?
I suppose this just gives you an insight into where HMRC collect most of the revenue. And when I said earlier that the whole thrust of one of their main actions at the moment is to look at self-employed status and convert them to employees, it's not a great surprise when you see the amount of personal tax that's collected in proportion to all the other taxes. So this is where they'll have the best return for effort.
And then VAT implications?
Well, we touched on NHEP. I'm not a fan. It is there, it's available, but I don't think it sends the right message.
I think VAT is a whole other area that
we could spend half an hour on VAT and customs in its own right.
Yeah. Which we're not going to do today. So I think for now, I'm just going to thank you very much, Jerry. You offered to put your email address up there to be available for people in the download and the recording. You're happy to take questions, you said.
Yeah.
Likewise, if there are questions, I'm happy to take them. But just to let people know, you mentioned that issue of employer contractor IR35 is the law. It's undergoing change. We have a webinar which we recorded on the 18th of February that will come available on the globalambition.ie/evolve-UK website over the next week or so. The next webinar in our series is on the UK manufacturing sector. But what I'd say to our clients is two things. One, if there are specific topics in general about the change in the UK, please do let us know, but particularly about this issue of establishing a presence. We want to keep this webinar short. Come to us with what you think we haven't covered, and we can either get back to you individually, or if we see there's a lot of questions, we might run another short webinar, 15-20 minutes, simply addressing some of those.
And I think every Irish company will have their own specific issues around establishing a presence here. It's not generic in terms of this is how you do everything. And every conversation I have with an inbound company is always slightly different in terms of what they want to achieve, how they want to achieve it, and, you know, bluntly, the funding they have available to do that. So every conversation is slightly different.
And I think that's exactly what has been borne out through our conversations with clients. I think when we get into the nitty-gritty, every single company has a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you very much for the overview that you've given us, Jerry, today. Thank you for all the help you've provided to Irish companies in the past. I know you're very generous with your time for a first conversation. Thank you for your offer to have that conversation with Irish companies who are interested in setting up here, and wish you a very speedy recovery for that cold that really you kept well under control. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.